Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have an SCMH awareness. Our topic today is Advanced Product Quality Planning, an overview. This is a repeat of an over-attended webinar earlier in the month. We realize people are calling in from all over the world, so good morning and good evening. We appreciate that you were able to attend at this early time or late time in the case, whatever the case may be. My name is Susan Parsons, and I work for the International Aerospace Quality Group, the IAQG. Specifically, I support the Product and Supply Chain Improvement, PSCI, strategy stream of the IAQG, and our product is the Supply Chain Management Handbook, or SCMH. I will be sharing some information for those of you that may not be aware of the SCMH. I'll go through it quickly since many of you may have already seen this. We will then go right into the main event, the APQP overview, presented by Deborah Oberhausen of UTC Pratt & Whitney and Jennifer Cox of Spirit Aerosystems. After this, I'll get back to reviewing your questions as they come in and are posted. I will be sharing those questions with Deb and Jennifer so they can answer as many as possible in the allotted 90-minute time frame. You can type your questions into the box on your screen because you're muted now, and we'll be answering them as we go through each one. Deb, if you want to go to the next slide. A few tips to help with the lag times between slides, if you have any. Close as many applications running in the background as possible. This will help. Once the webinar starts, of course, I've stated you are on mute. Please use the question box on the control panel. Feel free to type a question at any time during the presentation. If you think of it, put the slide number down if there's something we should be referring back to help the panelists. The presentation and QA specifics will be posted in the webinar section of the SCMH shortly after this presentation is complete and we have a chance to review both the recording and the webinar. There'll be no certificates provided for this webinar. This is not a training, this is an awareness, and although some of you may be using it as training, we don't provide the certificates for that. Also, if you could help us out to get a better idea of how many people are attending, if you have more than one person, so 2 or more, just type the number in your question box so we know how many people are attending. After the first of the year, we'll be switching to audio broadcast to allow more people to attend, which would require speakers or a headset from your end, but we'll let you know, and that will be the January webinar. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said, I went through the tips. I'm going to go a quick view of the SCMH, and then we'll go right into the main event. So many of you realize already by now, especially with 9100, that there are standards provided and created by the IAQG member companies. But many people may not know that there's plenty of support guidance in the SCMH. And sometimes that guidance becomes the standard. In the case of this one today, 9145 is the standard. It started out as some guidance in the SCMH. It became a standard. And sometimes there's a standard maybe that is updated based on some of the guidance and the member company experts that have provided additional expertise in the guidance. And it goes into the next revision of a standard. To access the SCMH, you just need to go into your browser and type in iaqg.org. It will take you to the SCMH. Once there, you just accept the terms and conditions. And you can manage your account if you happen to have changed your email address in the last few months or year since you originally registered. You'd want to go in there and update your email password, your email address, so that you receive these invites. As I said, you can go into it by, we could do a quick look around, but I'm going to devote as much time as possible to this webinar and be able to spend a lot of time answering any questions that you may have at the end. So only if time permitting, we'll go through a quick view of the SCMH. But one of the things I'd like to point out is, and we'll talk about it in the next couple of slides, if you look to the left of the screen under IAQG on the picture, you see the word content. We're going to go into that in a couple of slides, and I'll tell you what that's for. If you look across the top and you see webinars, one of the tabs is webinars. That's where you'll see a list of all the past webinars, along with now the recordings link as it becomes available. And today's section is 7.2. So if you click on the number 7 tab down to 7.2, you'll see all of the advanced product quality planning manuals, checklists, and the documentation that we've provided as free guidance for your viewing. Here's the content slide. So like I said, if you click on that content link on the main page of the SCMH, it'll bring you to this. This gets updated every time we have an IAQG meeting. As a result of some of the revisions and the new materials or maybe the proposed topics, this chart gets updated. Right now you see integrated management systems. That's almost complete, and a lot of revisions to the current material that's in progress of being revised. Okay? So now I'd like to have Deborah and Jennifer, your panelists, introduce themselves and begin the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever it happens to be for you. My name is Deb Oberhausen. I work with Pratt Whitney. I've been with Pratt Whitney for 14 years. Prior to that, I had a lot of experience in the automotive industry, working with APQP and PPAP in the automotive industry. And I have been working now, I think this project started back in 2013 when we first created some material for the Supply Chain Management Handbook. And then we moved on into a standard. We've been updating the materials, and now we're looking at where we want to go and how we can help our user community with deployment. Jennifer, if you'd like to introduce yourself now, and Jennifer is doing a piece of this presentation as well. I'm going to do the APQP portion. Jennifer will be doing the PPAP portion, but Jennifer, if you'd like to introduce yourself now, please do so.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Cox, and I am from Spirit Aerosystems, the Supplier Quality Assurance Group. I am also on the deployment team with Deb, working to standardize these tools and create awareness.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so let's get started. So the purpose of today's presentation is to introduce some of the key concepts of APQP, Advanced Product Quality Planning, and PPAP, Production Part Approval Process, and the benefits of the application. We want to communicate the availability of the guidance material and training, and I'm going to just spend a few minutes on implementation and some of the first steps with implementation of 9145. So, as we mentioned earlier, there's a series of webinars associated with this. Advanced Product Quality Planning is a fairly complex process that uses a variety of tools that not all of us are familiar with. This series of webinars was designed to establish a high level of understanding on some of the key requirements in the 9145 standard. These webinars will not make you an expert, but instead will provide you with enough information to see the benefits and the need for getting more information on these topics. For this purpose, sources of additional information will be included in each of the webinars. The proven methods of APQP and PPAP applied to other industries, have been applied to other industries for many years, are now being applied to the aviation, space, and defense industry via the 9145 standard. These webinars will show the relationship of each of these topics to the standard. To build your knowledge on these key requirements, we recommend that you attend the full series of webinars. The series of webinars actually started in November, and this, as Sue mentioned, is the second presentation of this overview. The stars here indicate the webinars that have been completed and now are available on the Supply Chain Management Handbook website. So we welcome you to go and review those webinars if you were unable to attend the other webinars. So now let's get into, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of 9145, talk a little bit about, what it is, why it is, and what are some of the benefits. So 9145 is a globally harmonized AS&D requirements document that has standardized the industry's approach to product development. It's not a revolutionary concept, it's an evolutionary concept. We all have a product development process in place right now. This is a methodology for enhancing it and standardizing. This standard combines both APQP and PPAP. These concepts originated in the automotive industry in the 1990s. The first version of the automotive PPAP manual was published in 1993, followed by the APQP manual in 1994. Very briefly stated, the process defined in 9145 is based on the 5 phases of product development listed here on the left. It starts with upfront planning of the project and then moves into product design, followed by process design, and then into validation and finally delivery of product. The key drivers of completing these 5 phases successfully are listed on the right. Leadership engagement, establishing cross-functional teams, managing the project to ensure on-time completion of defined deliverables and outputs. All of this will be discussed in greater detail later in this presentation. So why 9145? The primary objective of 9145 is to improve quality and reduce costs. With better planning, products can reach maturity faster with fewer engineering changes and defects in the early stages of production and product use. These reductions result in lower product lifecycle costs. The incorporation of proactive tools focuses the team on risk identification and mitigation early in the process. This is where it really needs to happen. Plus, there is the added benefit of applying APQP methods, tools, and lessons learned to work with work transfers for further ensuring their success as well. Because of these benefits, progressive companies have incorporated APQP into their product development process. Here's an illustration of the companies that they're not only incorporating it into the product development process, but they are also flowing it down to their suppliers. There's a lot of momentum in the AS&D industry to improve the product development process with this methodology. Most of the companies listed here have participated in one form or another in the development of guidance materials that is included in the Supply Chain Management Handbook. Also, they've participated in the development of the standard and now are participating in the deployment of the APQP tools and methods. So continuing with why, we know we're after improved quality and reduced costs. Most of us have seen this illustration before, the iceberg that's used to illustrate that what you see is not the full picture. There are many visible costs associated with poor planning, but there are even more hidden costs. Most of us are aware of the visible costs, those above the waterline, and many of us probably even measure these costs, things like non-conformances, rework, and of course penalties applied by customers when we didn't meet their contractual requirements on delivery or quality. Some of these other costs below the waterline don't get the same visibility, but they are real and they eat at the bottom line profitability. So what does 9145 do for AS&D? First and foremost, it standardizes the product development process across AS&D. It strengthens collaboration, driving faster resolution of issues. It uses tools that proactively identify risks for early mitigation. It has defined phases to ensure things are accomplished at the right time. And the addition of PPAP boosts product verification. First article inspection, having been around for a long time, is now an element of PPAP. Focuses on product conformance, while PPAP in its entirety brings verification of process planning and capability into focus. PPAP ensures the process is capable of producing conforming products at the customer's demand rate. So how are the benefits achieved? The APQP process is designed to drive the items listed here. When we truly understand the customer's expectations and we have a detailed plan to accomplish them, we can better manage costs and risk, achieving reliability and target costs. We can also minimize changes by developing robust product and process designs accomplished through collaboration of cross-functional teams and leadership support. So let's look at some data. What do we have that says this really works? So here's some notional data based on another industry's experience showing how the product development costs are shifted with the application of APQP. Observing the red and green lines in the chart on the upper left, you can see the costs are slightly higher in the development phase, but significantly lower in the production phase with the application of APQP. On the bar chart just below, you can see specific details of this shift with regard to prevention, inspection, and failure costs, both internal and external. The increase in prevention costs is significantly offset with reductions in inspection and failure costs. This is often a hard sell in organizations because APQP is a cost avoidance strategy. We are working to get additional real AS&B data to illustrate the cost savings from APQP. For this presentation, we have obtained one company's data showing the benefits of PPAP, one of the elements of APQP. So this is one company's data. It's specifically focused on PPAP and the benefits of PPAP. I'm showing two examples here. The graph on the left illustrates the application of PPAP on two different new product introduction programs of comparable size and complexity. The second program, shown in green, shows a reduction in nonconformances through the launch curve, clearly illustrating the benefits of PPAP. As we know, a reduction in nonconformance directly equates to reduced costs and improved quality signature, customer satisfaction, of course. APQP adds timing to the elements of PPAP. This particular application of PPAP was imposed outside of the framework of APQP. The biggest benefits come from completing the deliverables included in PPAP much earlier in the development cycle. Had this been in place, it's likely this company would have experienced even further reductions in nonconformances, along with some of the other benefits of APQP previously mentioned. The graph on the right illustrates the application of PPAP on products already in production, but are being transferred to another production site. This company recognized that applying PPAP to parts in specific situations, such as work transfers, there was the potential to reduce the nonconformances typically experienced with a work transfer. The black line showed the company's typical nonconformance rate on work transfers where neither APQP nor PPAP were applied at the time of the product launch. The green line below shows the nonconformance rate when PPAP is applied. Completing the elements of PPAP during a work transfer forces the organization to use the proactive process planning tools of APQP to further reduce risk in the production process. Incorporating what has already been learned into the process flow diagram, failure mode and effects analysis, and control plan greatly increase the success of the work transfer. And as you can see here, an 80% reduction in nonconformances. Now I'm going to provide you with more detail about the APQP process. In this section, I will give you an overview of APQP. I will introduce the APQP principles, the 5 phases, and their alignment to a typical product development process. I will also identify the milestones and key outputs of each of the phases. APQP provides a structure to the product development process in a manner that assures customer satisfaction. Planning and scheduling that has to be done, monitoring timely and effective completion of tasks, communicating, escalating, and resolving issues. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you the APQP logo, located at the bottom of the page here. It really is quite useful for describing the process in a simple picture. At the top of the circle is the program needs or inputs. The first ring shows the 5 phases. The next ring shows the pillars, which we will cover in detail in the next couple of slides. The triangle represents the activities, and finally the arrow at the bottom shows PPAP at the output, thus achieving the ultimate goal of customer satisfaction. You often hear the statement, or you will often hear the statement, that PPAP is the objective evidence that APQP has been completed. The pillars of success shown in this illustration represent the APQP principles supporting customer satisfaction. The first pillar focuses on organizational commitment and management support. Implementation of APQP is a management-driven strategic decision that requires support from the entire organization. The information generated through the APQP process allows management to track and pace new, modified product development activities. Highlighting risks and monitoring monitoring status of APQP deliverables promotes the execution of relevant actions needed to remove roadblocks that may jeopardize completion of tasks necessary for on-time product delivery. Top management needs to ensure that the leadership team is trained. They need to allocate resources and ensure that they are properly trained in the tools and methods of APQP. They need to lead reviews, ensure that the process is applied consistently across all programs and products, and finally, they need to remove roadblocks. Leadership plays a key role in the success of APQP. The next pillar is cross-functional teams. Cross-functional teams build unity of purpose across the business. They support commitment and alignment with project timing. They ensure effective communication across the various business functions. As you can see listed here are some of the typical participants in a cross-functional team. However, teams may vary in size and nature depending on the size and structure of the organization. When structuring the team, the organization needs to consider all stakeholders. This often includes both internal and external stakeholders, depending on the project. Clearly defined roles and responsibilities will ensure timely completion of tasks in support of the overall project plan. And finally, the third pillar, the project plan. Effective project planning. The project plan is based on customer needs. Key target dates are cascaded throughout the value stream. Again, this may include both internal and external parties. All information is formalized into the project plan. Progress is tracked and reported on a planned schedule. Commitment to a firm APQP plan, again, is another critical success factor. That's why this section, APQP principles, the pillars of success, these are the 3 pillars of success. So APQP, as mentioned in the earlier slide, APQP is a methodology that is applied to your existing product development process. This slide shows the phases of APQP aligned with the traditional checkpoints in the product development process. This illustration is included in the 9145 standard. While this illustration is conceptual, one could debate the amount of overlap and gaps, as this could vary depending on the product. Nevertheless, you can see how the phases are not stop-start phases, but rather overlapping and transitional. At this time, I'd like to introduce what we will be referring to as the key milestones of APQP. The first milestone is the finalization of the product concept. Sometimes, or in the traditional manner, it's often referred to as the end of concept, and we call it the PDR. The second milestone is design validation and verification, also known as design release. The third milestone is production readiness review. This is where the process is reviewed to ensure that everything is in place for the start of production. Trained personnel, tooling, gauges, work instructions, all of the documentation needed to run the process. The fourth milestone is the first article inspection. Initial parts coming from the production process are inspected for conformance to requirements. And finally, the fifth milestone is where we validate the process, validate that it can produce conforming product at the customer's demand rate. In the next few slides, we'll get into more detail about these phases. Phase 1, planning. The goal of Phase 1 is to establish the framework of the project and finalize the product concept. All project inputs should be identified and captured during this phase. Inputs will come from multiple sources: the customer's regulatory agencies, historical data, benchmarking, lessons learned, company knowledge, and even business strategies. These inputs are used to establish technical, quality, and manufacturing requirements. They drive the make, buy, and supplier selection decisions. Historical data and customer input are used to set product, quality, and operation goals. All of this information is pulled together into a project plan aligned with the project and customer needs. This phase ends with when the product concept is finalized and made available to the project team so that the product and process designs can be initiated. APQP Phase 2. The goal of Phase 2 is to finalize the design. The process focuses on the translation of the product requirements into a controlled, verified, and validated product design. Design risks are identified and mitigated through the design risk analysis. There are multiple methods to accomplish this. However, the 9145 standard specifically calls out the design failure mode effects analysis, often referred to as DFMEA, as the preferred method. This tool ensures that the product key characteristics are identified and communicated to the producer. Product design is verified and validated by the design organization, while the team commits to product manufacturability. The final output is the design record and the bill of material for a design that has been verified and validated. APQP Phase 3. During Phase 3, the processes and methods for producing the product are designed and developed. Planning for the manufacturing process starts as soon as sufficient product information is available. All producers within the value stream, both internal and external, are included in this phase. However, to ensure manufacturability, some critical producers may even be engaged in the product design activities earlier on. The production readiness review is the milestone achieved here, is conducted at the end of the phase as a checkpoint to assure that the manufacturing processes are sufficiently documented, process control points and methods have been identified, operators are properly trained, all materials, equipment, tools, gauges are available and functioning. All deficiencies are noted and corrected as soon as possible. Phase 4. The goal of Phase 4 is to demonstrate that the manufacturing and assembly processes can produce conforming products at the customer's demand rate. The initial production runs start in Phase 4. Products are produced at the planned production rate using production equipment and processes. Data is collected to verify that the process is capable of producing conforming products. Readiness to enter into serial production is evaluated. Have the product and process designs been validated? Did the results of the production readiness review validate that the process is ready? Have the process corrective actions been completed? Very critical activities that need to be accomplished in Phase 4. First article production and production part approval process are the key outputs of Phase 4. Completion of these two activities constitutes product and process validation. FAI focuses on product conformity, while PPAP verifies that the process risks have been identified and mitigated, process controls have been established, and the process has demonstrated the potential to continually produce conforming products at the customer demand level. The key milestones are all completed within the first 4 phases. The fifth phase focuses on project closure. During this phase, the team evaluates if the project goals have been met and the customer satisfaction has been achieved. Activities in this phase typically include defect reduction, improved cycle time, product improvement, and cost reduction. For some products, maintenance, repair, and overall services are required. Provisions for such activities included in the earlier planning phases are executed in this phase. Finally, the organization ensures that lessons learned regarding both the product and the APQP process have been documented and acted upon. The foundation of the learning organization is to take the learnings, both good and bad, to improve future performance. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and Jennifer is going to provide an APQP overview for you.
So now we are going to go through a high-level PPAP overview and how it connects to APQP. I would like to note that PPAP will specifically be discussed in detail in a later webinar within this series. PPAP is an APQP element finalizing product and process validation. It is the combination of the first article inspection with process validation. PPAP, or the production part approval process, confirms that the production process is able to demonstrate the potential to produce conforming parts while fulfilling all requirements consistently at the customer's demand rate. PPAP elements are the output and objective evidence of APQP execution. They describe the key activities accomplished during each APQP phase. It is important that the PPAP elements are compiled throughout the APQP process. For example, creating a process FMEA will add little to no value if you're already producing parts. It can, however, be a very effective tool if done during the planning phase. So now let's review each of the elements within this chart. Elements 1 and 2 are your design records and design risk analysis. They take place in APQP Phase 2. I would like to note that if your organization is not the design authority, then your organization will not be responsible for these elements. APQP Phase 3 elements consist of the process flow diagram, the PSMEA, the control plan, and packing, preservation, and labeling approvals. In Phase 3, we are focusing on process planning and asking ourselves, what can go wrong and what controls need to be in place. Phase 4 consists of MSA, initial process capability studies, the first article inspection report, and any other additional specific requirements and the PPAP approval form. Again, more detail of the PPAP elements listed will further be defined during the PPAP webinar later on in this series. You may also refer to the IAQG supply chain management site for further information. Okay, so once the PPAP file is compiled and complete, the file will need to be submitted to the customer for disposition. The customer will review the PPAP file and assign either an approved, interim approval, or rejected disposition. Some customers may have varying submission levels. An approval indicated that the PPAP requirements have been met and the organization is authorized to ship. An interim approval indicates that not all PPAP requirements have been met. However, the organization is authorized to ship under specific customer conditions and restrictions. A rejection indicates that the PPAP requirements have not been met and the organization is not authorized to ship. The PPAP file should be maintained throughout the product life cycle. Similar to the FAI process, changes to the product and/or process require a PPAP resubmission. Now let's review some of the key aspects of the PPAP process. PPAP follows the successful completion of the first 4 phases of APQP. PPAP defines the standard deliverables for production part approval. The first article inspection is the first milestone of production validation. PPAP elements are updated as processes and product changes occur, and the products used for PPAP are from the initial production runs. In summary, 9145 is the internationally harmonized aerospace standard for APQP and PPAP. The APQP principles are keys to success. APQP has deliverables and milestones aligned to each of the 5 phases. PPAP approval is the output of APQP. APQP and PPAP apply throughout the life of the product.
Okay, so this is Deb again, and I'm going to take you through the guidance material and training that is available for PPAP. I would say if we look at the content of Supply Chain Management Handbook, this is one of the beefier sections of the handbook. So starting with the standards, they were approved late 2016 and early into 2017, depending on which sector. I've noted the publication dates for 2 of the sectors. I didn't have available to me the date for the European sector, but the standard has been published in all 3 sectors. So, Sue introduced the Supply Chain Management Handbook, and she told you that we were working in section 7.2. So I'm going to briefly go over some of the content that's in 7.2. So we have an introduction presentation. This presentation can be used just as a general presentation to introduce APQP to your organization. It doesn't get into all the benefits as we have here. This presentation that we're doing here can also be used to do that same thing. We have an APQP manual. The APQP manual has what we call an element card for every single deliverable that's mentioned in the Appendix B of the standard. So it gives you the details, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, who would be the typical owner, what are the resources that you need, and it kind of gives you an overall view of how to proceed through that particular deliverable. Each deliverable also has an associated checklist. The checklists are organized by phase, and when you go into the particular phase you're interested in, you would find a specific checklist for each deliverable. Then there's also a series of tools and templates. You can see those listed here. The design, the process flow diagram, the DFEMA, the PFEMA. There is a worksheet, the element of applicability 7212 is a worksheet and a control plan. And then there's, we got a lot of questions about in which circumstances, which APQP elements apply. And that's where we put together what we call an APQP applicability matrix. All of these items are available in the Supply Chain Management Handbook. And then one of our most recent additions is the maturity assessment. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. So understanding that many of us are in very preliminary phases of achieving compliance to 9145, we're just starting to see these requirements flow into some of our contracts. So we put together an assessment that's not only for the customer that's requiring APQP, but it's also in place to help one assess their own capability with regard to APQP. So the way this is set up, it's broken down into 5 sections. There's management awareness and commitment, organizational alignment and effective communication, project management and risk management, the use of tools, and the readiness of the external suppliers. So you can use it, it's recommended, and I'll talk a little bit when I talk about the implementation. You can use it, again, for your own organization. You can flow it down to your external providers. And if you're just looking to improve your product development process, it's certainly a good tool to do that. A little bit, just a very brief, some brief tips on where to start with deployment. So one of the things that we would recommend is start with benchmarking other companies. There's a lot of companies that are in the early phases of APQP, and they are willing to share. So that's a good thing. So going out and benchmarking, performing a self-assessment using the maturity matrix to identify your strengths and weaknesses, and then figuring from that, determining what training is needed based off of the maturity matrix. Develop a plan to address your training needs. And then finally, as you develop the things and identify the gaps in your system and try to figure out how you're going to get all of these requirements in place, what you really need to do is take and incorporate APQP into your own product development process. Establish conformance to the standard and customer requirements, and make sure it's documented in your quality management system. So here's a little bit showing. So we have, as we mentioned earlier, we've completed, actually we've completed 4 of the webinars, including this one as being the second time. Those are the 3 that are highlighted in the gold there. The next one coming up is control planning, which is next week. And then we have one in January for measurement systems analysis. We have another one in February for process capability and control. And then finally in March, we're doing a PPAP webinar. So we welcome and we certainly encourage you all to participate in those webinars. But if you can't make those dates, you can certainly watch the webinar from the Supply Chain Management Handbook. Here's just a printed listing showing the times globally around the world. So that can help you with your planning. The invitations will go out, I think, a couple weeks prior to the actual upcoming webinars. So with that ends our presentation for today. And I'm going to believe that Sue has been collecting some questions as we've been going through this. So I'll turn it back to Sue, and we can get started with answering some questions.
Okay. Thank you, Deb and Jennifer. And yes, we have a few questions come in, and I'll go through those. If anybody else would like to ask a specific question, please enter it now, and I'll try to read them live after I go through these first few that have come in during the webinar. The first one, is the PPAP in this seminar based off of and or related to the automotive PPAP?
Well, the answer to that is yes. Again, if we go back into the history of where we certainly started with the blue books, the automotive blue books, and we started with the PPAP blue book. But what we did is we accounted for, we did a benchmarking event with the companies that were participating in the activity, and we looked at some of the other things that companies were requiring as part of their product validation process. So we incorporated those things, and then we added some modifications, like process capability is a bit more challenging in our business. Low volume has a significant impact. Packaging is certainly a little bit more impactful. So we then incorporated some of those activities, and then of course we have the first article, which is a bit different from what automotive has done. So yes, it was very much based on the automotive PPAP, but we made some adjustments based on the need of the aviation, space, and defense industry.
Okay. The next are 2 different people asking similar questions, so I'm going to combine them a little. When will 9145 be referenced in 9100, and how is APQP being coupled with 9100?
Okay. Good question. Actually, when we started working on the 9145 standard, we did work with the 9100 was, the upgrade to 9100 was happening at the same time we were working on 9145. What we found is at that time, the industry wasn't ready to incorporate the APQP requirements into the standard as they are in the automotive standard, the TS 16949 or whatever the reference is now. It's the same number, but I think it has a different reference. Again, one of the places that we started with developing the 9145 standard was we looked at the APQP requirements that were already in the automotive standard, not just the Blue Book, but also the standard itself. And so we pulled those requirements out. We did ask for some of that to be put into this latest version of 9100, but like I said, the industry wasn't quite there yet. So it is not, I don't know where it will go on the next revision. Hopefully there will be a little bit more stronger reference to the 9145, but we typically in the IAQG standards, we typically don't specifically call out other standards as a requirement. So even if you look at first article, it doesn't call out 9102. It references to the product approval process by name, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily call out the standard. So I don't know if we'll be able to get that far that it would actually call out 9145 as a standard, but hopefully it will start to incorporate some of the requirements within the 9145. So right now, we are more or less left with customers calling it out on their purchase orders as an individual standard, the 9145. I don't know if I answered the second part of that question, Susan. Sue, what was?
It was, how is APQP being coupled with 9100?
Okay, I think I answered both questions. Okay.
Okay.
I think I did.
Yeah. And another question, how many PPAP reports are generated if design and production are not in the same organization? And who is validating or signing the reports if there are several?
So if it's typically what's happening, I mean, I think what we're talking about is, you know, if the design authority is designing and making the product, you know, it depends on the component. And the standard does talk about, you know, if you have a component, like a jet engine, that's got 7,000 parts on it, do we PPAP all 7,000 parts? Well, no, the standard allows you to work through what are the critical components, and then you walk through those critical components for your PPAP, which may end up taking, you know, some of those critical components then go down to the producer. So while we may have created the high-level component, we are procuring many of the elements. So now you're getting into a make-to-print producer, and they don't. And the standard specifically calls out that there's not a lot of tasks in phase 1 and 2 that they're responsible for. They still have to have a plan, an APQP plan, but they are not doing a lot of the design activities. They're really starting with developing the process. So the standard kind of gives you a little bit of, not really direction on how to do that, but some guidance around, you know, if you're a make-to-print, you're probably going to PPAP, you know, the requirement would to PPAP a specific component to your customer. But again, that component may have several components as part of that. And depending on what the customer requirements are, you may have to have a PPAP for every component, or you may have to go through a similar process where you identify what are the critical components and do your PPAP on those critical components. Thinking of PPAP is very similar to a first article. The first article is required really on every single component. but the PPAP may be required only on some of the key or critical components. Again, it's very customer specific, how the customer wants to require that. Some companies are going PPAP on all components, some are not. So we'll see how that levels out over time.
Okay. And how are process changes incorporated into the PPAP process after approval? Is it common to revisit the PPAP process for minor changes?
Well, it depends on, so this is one of the things that when we developed the standard, one of the things that we did is we didn't want to, we didn't want to introduce PPAP and updating PPAP requirements different from the way first article is required. So first article is, it's very specific about when you have to repeat your first article. If you're repeating your first article, and we point to 9102 as the reference for when things change, fit, form, and function, you need to repeat the first article, you need to repeat the PPAP. Based on that criteria is when you would have to resubmit a PPAP for most customers. Now remember, customers may get very specific about this, but the intention in the standard was a PPAP submission would be required, same as when a first article is required, as it's called out in first article. And we didn't want to make two sets of rules. Okay, so now if there are some minor changes that don't fit that criteria that you need to do a resubmission, okay, there may be some minor changes that that you would not require a resubmission, again, depending on customer requirements. But that doesn't negate the fact that your PPAP documents need to be updated. Your control plan, your FEMA, your process flow should always reflect your current activities. If your process flow indicates that you're adding a new flow line, well, then that would indicate you need a resubmission. If you're adding a new piece of equipment, you need a resubmission. But there may be some minor changes that would not fall into that criteria where you need a resubmission based on what's in 9102.
Okay. Would you say that APQP can be deployed in a research and technology area already? And if yes, in which level of depth?
Well, so we did discuss some of that, and we did get a lot of that feedback. I think the answer is yes, because we did look at, when we write harmonized standards, they have to apply across all of the aviation, space, and defense industry. And there are products, especially in the space world, where they are a one-off product. And it does get a little more challenging, but I think one would look at what are the applicable requirements. I mean, typically in a research operation, you're not going to have, say, for example, run process capability studies unless you are, in research evaluating a process and you want to see how consistent it is. But if you're making one or two items, I think there are many elements within the APQP process that could be applicable to research. I mean, especially when you look at, things like the design risk analysis and pulling information together from customers, from the industry, from the regulatory agencies, and it is just a good structure for product development. Where you get in the later phases, when you're actually setting up production processes, that may not be as applicable to a research operation, unless, of course, you are actually studying in research some manufacturing processes, which is entirely possible. I mean, there's a lot of times we create a design and we don't really have the technology to produce that design. So then you find yourself in a research setting where you're researching how to produce that design. So you may get into more of those production type activities, depending on how deep you're going with that research. So there's definitely an applicability. It could certainly, would it be applied as is? Probably not. It would definitely need some modifications.
Okay. Is there a value in compiling a PPAP package for a mature product?
That's interesting, because the piece of data that I showed was there are pieces of it that are applicable if you have not been completely successful in your launch or in your product. So I think it to me it depends. I mean, I remember, I'm just going to quote what happened to me when I was in the automotive industry. PPAP, we had an event where Ford Motor Company came in and wanted to see PPAP files for products for spare parts that were produced 20 and 30 years ago, okay? So they're looking for PPAP files for components for a 1967 Mustang. Well, we didn't have that. So you kind of have to consider what's the volume of what you're producing. If you're still in a significant volume and you are seeing that you're not achieving your quality standards, it's certainly beneficial to go back and do things like, especially the process flow diagram, the control plan, and especially the FEMA, and even getting some input on the design risk analysis. You know, when producers don't know the exact failure points in a design, it's hard for them to know exactly where they need to focus their attention. So there is benefit. In fact, some companies have gone back and put those requirements on when there's been an escape. They go back and they ask their supplier or their producer to put together their control plan, their process flow diagram, and their FEMA, so that they can improve the process and understand what's going on in the process. So there's definitely benefit to go back, but it depends on the situation. If you're producing product successfully with 0 to no nonconformances, very low, or say a very low ppm, you may not see the value in it. However, if you're doing that at a low production rate, there may be some value in it. So you really have to assess each situation, but there's definitely some value.
For companies without design authority, what phase do they begin being involved in?
The standard calls out, the standard calls out phase 3. But if you look at, and one of the slides that we didn't include in this presentation is, I'm going to go back to this slide here. Hang on a second. I'm going to use this slide here. So if you look at this, and we do have an illustration in the Supply Chain Management Handbook, and one of the things you have to keep in mind is when the design is released, and you can see that here at milestone B, okay? When you look at this and you say, okay, these drawings are going to go to the producer, you can see that it really crunches, because now your first article inspection is over here. So you end up really crunching this line down. So the idea here is that you really want to get your producer involved. It really starts with phase 3, but understanding phase 2 and phase 3 are 100% overlap, okay? So the sooner the design organization gets the drawing or the design released to the producer, the more time that producer has to be in phase 3. So the producer is going to focus on phase 3, 4, and 5. And the standard, I believe, calls that out. Again, you don't, even if you are a producer, you're still going to have some planning activities to do. And it's mostly going to be cascading the requirements that came to you, some of those key dates. but the producing organization really starts at phase 3. Now, what I mentioned earlier in the presentation is, you know, these cross-functional teams should include producers, and in some cases, the producer will be engaged in the design activities only to verify the manufacturability of the components.
I think this question you may have just answered. Does phase 2 apply to OEM suppliers?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what we mean by OEM. I would be more inclined to use the term the design authority. So if it's if we're saying OEM going all the way up to the top of the food chain, which is the the airframer or the engine provider, or it depends on you know, the contractual flow down. So it would so if you go to, let's go to the very top of the food chain, let's say we're talking about an airframer, it's up to the airframer whether or not they want to deploy APQP. But if you go back to internal, if you go back to, I think it was this slide here, okay, you can see we have a lot of OEMs on here that are deploying APQP internally and to their suppliers. It's really kind of hard to require your supplier to do APQP if you're not following those same strategies internally.
Okay. How or where does qualification testing / reports tie into the PPAP elements?
Again, that's an interesting question because the team had a lot of discussion about that. Some would say, depending on the product, some would say that that is happening within this gap here. And there were a number of organizations that really wanted phase 2 to blend all the way into phase 4. It's happening in here. So when we talk about the design release, and we do talk about, if we go into phase 2, I'm going to jump over here to phase 2. In phase 2, we do talk about a verified, validated design, but that's not qualification. So the qualification testing is often happening over here, meshing, because I know there's a lot of iterations going on here, but the distinction that the team made when we were working this illustration here is that you really have a release design at the end of phase 2. Now, we all know that often is not a fixed design because we know this qualification testing is going on, and there may be some feedback that's going to bring you back into revising. So the distinction that we made here is this is where configuration management really starts with that final design release. So I don't know if I've answered the question clearly here, but it's happening in here, and that's why, you know, we finally ended up in the standard saying that this is it's a conceptual illustration. In some companies, if you're considering qualification testing as part of this design and development, then this line certainly extends further. But the intention here was to communicate that, you know, at least the initial design has to be released so that the other organizations can start working on what they need to work on. I hope that helps. I know that's a good question, a really good question.
Okay. This person says, so in phase 4, suppliers need to submit FAI and PPAP?
Depending on the customer requirements, typically, yes, they can be 2 separate activities. And then the PPAP file would then, because first article is first article, and it is a narrower scope. In some organizations, again, depending on what the customer wants, they may ask for the first article submission independent of the PPAP submission. Some organizations may want it all together. I've seen some organizations may want some of the PPAP first articles early on in the process, just as an assurance to make sure they are being developed early on in the process. So it kind of depends on the organization, but it's not a bad idea to keep them separate, and we do kind of still think of them as two separate activities because first article is required for everything, where PPAP may be required for some things.
Okay. Any suggestions on how a small organization go about finding benchmark partners for APQP?
Well, I would, for smaller organizations, I'm going to go back to, I mean, this is a good place to start, just to see how some of these organizations are executing APQP. Most organizations right now are willing to share their activities. We're all learning on this together. I wouldn't rule out any automotive suppliers, although I would smaller automotive suppliers. If you're looking to benchmark same size organizations, that may be a little tougher. But we also know that many of these large organizations have smaller groups within their organization. I know that's true of Parker Aerospace. They may have smaller organizations, and you can see how those smaller organizations within their large organization are doing that. You know, that same thing would hold true for, I think, Rockwell Collins, which is now Collins Aerospace. We know that there is smaller organizations in there maybe doing different things. So I think you could poke at some of these companies, and we may have, you know, we can talk in our team if you give us, you know, direct a specific question to Sue, and she can give us specific information to the team, and then maybe we can talk amongst ourselves and see what we can come up with and make a recommendation back.
Okay, that's a good offer. Thank you. Is the aviation industry looking into standardizing the PPAP and process flow and DFMEA forms?
Well, that's actually exactly what we're trying to do through these trainings, and that's why we put the templates out there. There is the Aero Engine Supplier Quality Organization they are getting into a deeper level of requirements that line with the 9145. For example, the AS 13004 is working to standardize the process flow diagram, the control plan, and the FEMA. And what we've done in our, what we are very careful to do here as we are putting together materials for the Supply Chain Management Handbook. I'm going to flip over to this slide here. This is exactly the intention of these materials. So we put templates out there. We are making sure, like for example, we did a webinar on control plan, and we noticed that our template was slightly different from what was in the AS 13004 standard, and we aligned those two templates. I think we are still in the process of doing that for the PFMEA. So that is absolutely the objective of this deployment team that we're working. Unfortunately, it's very difficult in the AS&D industry to get agreement on things like that within a standard. So we're trying to do that by creating common training, doing these webinars, putting templates, making templates available, and just try to establish that common approach.
Okay. Do you have an example of how to model the APQP PPAP process within a Microsoft project schedule for earned value management? Some aerospace programs are government-related and require EVMS, and some aerospace customers want to see earned value practice.
I don't. But you know what? If we could get our hands on that data, that would be amazing. I know that you know we have government work, and I know we're deploying APQP, so I think that will be eventually available, but I don't have any examples right now.
Okay.
But again, I mean, there would be, again, if you went to that chart, you know, there are organizations on that chart. Raytheon, for example, does a lot of military work. It might be worthwhile to see what Raytheon is doing, but I don't have any examples right now.
Okay. Question from a practical point of view: who or which department typically is responsible for the PPAP?
That's a trick question. It's we share it. I'm going to just give you what we do. We share it between manufacturing, engineering, and quality. Quality is kind of the oversight. Manufacturing engineering is they are primarily responsible for most of the deliverables except what comes from the design organization. So manufacturing engineering plays the biggest role in the compilation of the PPAP file. And I can tell you that also that was, in my years in automotive, that was exactly the same thing. Manufacturing engineering had the responsibility of preparing the PPAP file. Quality provided an overview of that or an oversight of that. Quality signed off on all the artifacts before it was submitted to the customer. So I can answer for typical.
Okay. I got one from, okay. If there is no design risk, for example, DFMEA, what are the best approach to implement APQP for old products?
Again, I would go back to what your process is telling you. If you don't have, it sounds like all the design risks have been mitigated. I don't know if I should interpret that to say that there are no KCs. That would be kind of hard to believe because there's always going to be some critical components or critical functionality of a part. But your processing data should tell you if you need to go back and do PPAP. Because again, if your producer or your manufacturing process is not delivering product at cost on quality, then you know there are issues, and those tools that are part of the PPAP process could certainly be advantageous to execute. So, I mean, again, one of the things that I would say is that if you're looking for a place to start and you don't want to go full APQP, but you have products, you have some legacy products, and you think they could use some tuning up and improve the manufacturing process, you might start with looking at the requirements of 13004, which principally focuses on risk mitigation in the manufacturing process, which is process flow diagram, the FEMA, and the control plan. It's always a good idea to start there to understand where your variation is coming from, what's causing you delays, what's causing your rejects, what's causing waivers. So again, it really depends on the situation.
Okay. How does design engineering communicate any needs they have for the APQP? This question focuses beyond product characteristics and their tolerances, especially on matters such as measurement uncertainty or minimum conformance rates among delivered products.
Honestly, because we know there's, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's many ways to do design risk analysis. And when you're dealing with designs, it becomes a little bit touchy if you're not also the producer. When you hand off this information to the producer, pardon me. So it really, you have to, the design risk analysis, like we said, there's many ways to do it. The reason we elect the preferred method as the DFMEA is because that is a good tool to communicate the design risks and what potential process risks may be encountered. So, and again, it can go back to the product. If you need that producer's input into those designs, you need to pull them into the team early so that you do get the right tolerances in place, the right design risk mitigations, and often in that early phase you're also looking at, you're assessing manufacturability. So when you're trying to communicate to the producer, that's where it gets a little bit touchy, because we know design, the DFMEA or the design risk analysis always contains proprietary information. So there has to be a methodology for communicating that to the producer, whether you call it out in components or tolerances, or however you call that out. Somehow it has to be communicated to the producer where those design risks live. So for example, if you're designing outside of the normal design space, then that automatically becomes a risk to the producer. So there has to be a way to communicate that, whether that be through, a separate document that tells your producer what are the design components that are critical. And you're right, it may not be just a tolerance, it may be a functionality. Like a pump needs to run at a certain speed, or a certain electrical discharge needs to happen, or certain things need to happen. So you're not going to call that out in terms of a key characteristic per se, but perhaps a key functionality, which may include multiple characteristics when it comes down to the supplier. So it's important. That's why we called out the DFMEA specifically. And a design engineer could probably answer that question better than me. I'm not a design engineer. Just to clarify.
Okay. This next question you may not be able to respond to fully, but from your perspective, from all of the companies on your list who are adopting APQP, what is the expectation of the supplier organization's leadership role in regards to how APQP PPAP is implemented?
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking how. Read it to me one more time. I just want to make sure I understand the question.
From all of the companies on your list who are adopting APQP, what is the expectation of the supplier organization's leadership role in regards to how APQP and PPAP are implemented?
Well, I could speak for our organization. Well, certainly the supplier quality organization has to take a leadership role, and but certainly it's not independent, because there's decisions that need to be made early on. First off, you have to decide, how and where is APQP and PPAP going to be deployed, to what suppliers, to what components, to, so there's a lot of decisions that have to happen. I'm going to say they happen jointly between manufacturing, design, and the supplier quality organization. How do we want to flow these requirements, and to what extent, to the supply base? It can be different based on whether you're flowing just, if you're putting a design responsibility for some component, a design responsible supplier may have different requirements than and we talked about that, than a build-to-print designer. The design responsible supplier may be far more engaged, but the supplier quality organization also, beyond what you're going to flow down, the supplier quality organization in most companies have also taken on the responsibility of training and educating the supply base, which has been a significant burden for most companies. So again, that's why we're doing these webinars and trying to commonize things, and hopefully down the road we'll put together some training, because we want to make sure that the suppliers are educated and know how to do these tasks, because these tasks lose their value if they're not performed correctly. If you look at a FEMA, a process FEMA can be very valuable if done correctly. If it's done just to get a check in the box or say I did my FEMA, it's not going to be very effective. So it's typically, like I said, the supply chain organization has the responsibility in most organizations to prepare the supplier to meet these requirements. Now, if they don't do that, they're going to get what they get. So that's kind of something to consider.
Okay. Do we have statistics from the auto industry showing this process improved those organizations' overall reliability?
Well, that's what the one slide was showing. That was actually from the automotive industry. So I can go, so the one slide with the data on it. Let me see if I can get that slide. So this, unfortunately, I don't have, I guess I can't get to that slide. So I'm going to go back to this slide here. So this slide here was actually developed from the automotive industry. And like I said, they have a lot of years behind this right now, more than 20 years behind this. They have definitely seen the advantages of the tools that are within the APQP framework. The automotive industry is very diligent with their PPAP submissions. It took them many years to do what I mentioned in my previous answer, is that, initially the FEMAs weren't doing what they needed to do. But later on, what happened is when you'd have an escape or stop ship or whatever they want to call it, you would get called into the OEM and to explain your failure. And one of the key answers you had to answer is why did your FEMA fail to identify this defect, this failure, and why did you not mitigate that potential? So when we started doing that, then it really started driving these tools. But like I said, I don't have anything more than conceptual data or notional data on that, but this was derived from the automotive industry.
Okay. Are there any different levels to be applied to aerospace PPAP, just like IATF 16949?
Different levels. Not specifically called out in the standard. Right now, it's kind of up to customers. It's up to the customer to decide, And like I said, the standard does allow some variation in terms of where you want to apply it and where you don't.
Okay. Do you have any guidance on applying APQP on products already in series production? Do all phases of APQP apply in this case?
I think we kind of answered that already.
Yeah, I believe so. Does PPAP APQP support to achieve Six Sigma process? If yes, how?
Well, it certainly uses the same tools. The standards and the requirements may be a little low for Six Sigma. For example, if you look at the requirements for process capability, I think it only goes to 1.33. So that would not meet the criteria of Six Sigma per se, but it certainly is in alignment and uses many of the tools. I'm not a Six Sigma expert, so I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about it. I've not been directly involved in a Six Sigma project, if you will. So but when you look at, the risk mitigation, the risk analysis, the use of statistics, those kinds of tools are similar to what's used in Six Sigma. So it certainly line up with a Six Sigma project or Six Sigma thinking, if you will. But you'd have to look at, because it certainly includes, looking at the measurement system, validating the measurement system, ensuring that you don't have too much variation in the measurement system, and of course your process capability studies and all of those things are also part of Six Sigma.
Okay.
And I think, Sue, we're just about, I don't know if you have a few comments you want to make.
Right. There are plenty more questions, but we only have a couple minutes to wrap up. So I'm going to pass all the questions on to you and your team. And if we create a Q&A for the SCMH to go along with it, great. We'll see what happens with that. A lot of people have been asking about the presentation and specifically where to find it. I'm not sure, Deb, if you can click to go to the SCMH at this time. If not, I'll just talk to it. But the presentations are normally put up within a day or two after the webinar. This one is a repeat webinar, so it's actually already available. If you go to www.iaqg.org, you'll enter and register as an SCMH user. And right there on the webinar tab, yeah, you go right to the webinar tab.
Webinar, okay.
Click on that. Yeah, click on that once. You should just be able to click on it and have it open.
Yeah, my computer's being, it's not the website, folks, it's my computer.
Okay.
There we go.
It is.
There it is.
And then you can see I've tried to clump together the recent APQP under 7.2 there. You'll see the overview is there already. On the design risk analysis, one is up. It also has its recording up. We will get the recording from today after we review it, and then we'll place that up there as well. So I just want to tell everybody exactly where you can find both the presentation and the recording.
So the presentation is listed as a PDF.
Right.
Correct. And then the recording is going to be listed as the web.
It's an actual link, and it will take you to the live link, which I wouldn't click on now because it will take you back to WebEx, which is where our meeting's being held. Okay, so that people were asking specifically how to find it, so I wanted to make sure we got onto the SCMH and we showed people. Generally, you would be able to go on as if you were not registered and just look around at whatever you want. Only when you download it, you're asked to register to the SCMH, and it only takes a minute. It asks you what country you're from, and it's very quick. Okay. Also, at this time, if you haven't done it already, and if there's two or more people using the same connection, just pop that number, the total number in your room, in the box, question box, so that we can kind of do an accurate count at the end. And like I said, thank you very much to Deb and Jennifer for this presentation today. We will have them posted shortly, And have a great day. Deb, Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we're good. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah, green pads are kind of like what you would use. You know what I mean? Like they're using, they don't have any, or trial. Yeah. Who do I order them to? You would just put a PR through and that would go to John Murray. Mark can't do a PR? You can ask Mark to order it.